If you're building a serious e-commerce store with Medusa, you're probably going to need to extend the admin UI. And in this video, we're going to do exactly that. I'll be taking you through how to create custom UI routes, admin widgets, data tables, views, and much more. So let's get started. So what exactly do I mean by admin customizations? So the default Medusa project comes with a React-based admin dashboard, and the dashboard is used to manage your day-to-day e-commerce stuff like adding products, managing orders, inventory, customers. So out of the box, this dashboard for a real-world scenario is likely not going to cut it. So think about situations where you need custom reporting views, interfaces for internal tools like accounting, finance, marketing. In that case, you're going to need to extend the admin UI. So there's two ways to be able to extend the admin UI, either through routes or widgets. Routes let you add new pages to the admin dashboard. And to create a new route, simply go to your admin folder in your Medusa project, create a folder called routes. And within the routes folder, this uses a folder-based navigation structure. So simply, I can create a new folder for my new page. So let's call this custom. And within the new custom folder, I'm going to create a file called page.tsx. And in the page.tsx, you can have a simple React component. And besides the React component, all I need to export is something called define route config. And this is coming from the admin SDK. And this lets us define the label for our custom route, things like icon, and a couple of other things. I'll get to that in a little bit more detail later in the video. But for now, let's go to our admin dashboard and see how everything looks. In our admin dashboard, under the extensions dropdown here, you'll see our custom route being rendered here. And in the define route config export, I can define a couple of other things. So for example, the nested property lets me set this as a child for an existing UI route. For example, if I want this custom route nested underneath the products, I can simply define this as dash products. And if I go to my admin dashboard, instead of the custom route rendering under the extensions, now you'll see the custom route underneath the products tab as a child. I can also define a rank value, and the rank value is used to be able to define the order of your custom UI route. For example, I've created a custom to route, and let's say if I wanted to be able to control the order of this. So right now on my admin dashboard, the custom route shows up before the custom route to. Now, if I was to switch the order of this, I can simply define the rank in terms of the order that I want my routes in. Now, if I go back, you'll see that the custom route to renders before the custom route. I can also nest different routes together. So for example, if I wanted a nested route under my custom route, I can simply create a new folder in my custom folder called nested, and then a page.tsx. And again, similar to our parent route, we can copy and paste the same thing. We'll just call this nested, remove the rank. And now if I go back to my admin dashboard, you'll see my new nested route show up under the parent custom route. I can also create dynamic routes for my extensions. And to do that, we can use the straight brackets and define a dynamic path called ID. We can create a page.tsx for this. And to access the dynamic ID value, we can use the useParams hook from React Router DOM. And if we were to render out the ID within our page, it'll look something like this. So now when I go back to the admin dashboard and I type in something like custom route ID, you can see that the ID is dynamic. We can also set breadcrumbs for our custom UI routes. And breadcrumbs showcase the parent-child relationship between different pages. And to do this, we're going to export something called handle in our custom UI route. And we can call the label whatever we want. In this case, I've named it custom page. I'm going to do the same thing on our nested UI route as well. Similarly, I'm going to export a handle. The only difference being I'm going to call it nested in this case to show you the difference. Back in our admin dashboard, if I go to my custom UI route, you'll see that the custom page shows up as a breadcrumb. And if I go on the nested page, the nested will be nested under my parent custom page label. In a lot of cases, you're probably going to need to set the breadcrumb value dynamically. So think of something like a product page where we don't know the product title since we haven't fetched for that product yet. So we can't really set the product title as a breadcrumb unless if we fetch for that product beforehand. And to do that, we can use something called a route loader. And the loader runs a fetch request to search for details before the UI route is shown. So for example, with a route loader, you can fetch for the details before you show the UI route, and that way we can set the breadcrumb dynamically. To implement a loader in our custom UI routes, you'll have to export a asynchronous loader function, and within this function, we can fetch any data that we need for our custom page. We're going to call a simple fetch request to our admin products route using the dynamic ID from our URL. And to access this data within our main React component, we can use the use loader data from React Router DOM. It's going to look something like this. We're accessing the products that we're returning in our loader function. And now we can simply use the details of our product for our page. So for example, let's say if I want to render the product title on my page. So if I go to my custom route, I can type in any product ID after my custom route, and you will see the title of that product. Now, instead of setting the breadcrumbs statically like we were doing before, we can set them dynamically using the data returned in our loader function. So in this case, I'm going to set the product title as my breadcrumb. And if we go to our UI route, you'll see the Medusa sweatpants as the breadcrumb. Another way to extend the admin UI in Medusa is through something called widgets. Widgets are React components that you can inject into existing admin pages like products, orders, etc. And I can define where I want my custom widgets to be through something called injection zones. So these are basically placements for your custom widgets. For example, if I wanted a widget on the campaign details page, I can use the campaign.details.after value to define the placement for that React component. In our code, we'll create a separate widgets folder under the admin folder, which will contain all of our widgets. And let's create a widget for our products page. And to do that, we'll create a new file called product widget. And within the product widget.tsx file, I'm going to create a regular React component. And similar to the config export in our custom UI routes, in this case, I'm going to export a config called define widget config. This is where we can define where we want our widget to be placed. In our case, I want this widget to be on the product details page on the side after all of the other content on that page. If I save this, this is what it'll look like in my dashboard. On my product details page, if I go on to any of these product details, underneath you will see a new text appear called product widget. Now I can play around with the zone placement of my widget. So for example, let's say if I went instead of after, like before, you will see that the order of the different components on the side here will change, and my custom widget will be all the way on the top. I can also place my widget right in the middle of the main content here. In that case, I'm going to get rid of the side and simply go product.details of before. And now my product widget is on top of that page. Again, you can find all of the applicable injection zones on the Medusa docs. For example, for the product pages, these are all of the different injection zones that I have. Widgets that are placed on detail pages, such as my widget here, which is placed on product.details, will also inherit a data prop, which gives us information about that page. In this case, since it's on a product page, it will give me an object called admin product, which gives me information about that product. So I can go ahead and simply render the title of that product. Now that we've looked at a couple of different ways to extend the admin UI, we're going to put this all together and create a custom route and a widget for a brands module. In terms of my custom brand module, here's what I have already. I've created a custom module called brand, as well as workflows to be able to create, update, delete, as well as link and unlink brands from products. Also API routes to be able to access those workflows. I won't go into details on this much in this video since this is focused on admin UI extensions, but I'll probably create another video on this later on. So here's what I have in mind for my brand module. I want to be able to have a separate page for all of my brands, similar to categories and collections, that's nested under that main products tab. Along with that, on each product details page, I want to be able to have a widget where I can easily add a brand to a product or remove brand from a product. So this is a good time for us to stop and think what exactly we need in our code to make that happen. So to get started, in our code, in our routes directory, we're going to add a new path called brands. This is the brands list page and will contain all of the different brands that exist in my system. And like I showed you earlier, we can use the define route config export to define the label for my custom route, as well as where I want this route nested. So in our case, we're going to call it brands, and I want this nested underneath the products tab. And now if I go to my products tab, I can see that brands page that we've just added. I'm also going to export a handle to be able to define the breadcrumbs. In this case, I'm just simply going to call it brands. Medusa also provides a UI library, which you can use throughout your admin extensions, and it keeps everything a lot more consistent. And this is what I'll be using for my brands module. And you can find all the different components that are available on the Medusa docs. Back in my custom route, I've imported a couple of different things from Medusa UI and an outlet component from React Router DOM. I'm going to use this outlet component to be able to create something called a route segment. And we're going to use that to be able to create a drawer that opens on top of our list route. And that drawer is going to contain a form where we can create our new brands. To define a route segment, we're going to go to our brands directory and create a new folder. And instead of this being just a normal path, we're going to start this path with an @ symbol and the path that we are going to create, which will contain the drawer and the form to be able to create a new brand. Once that's in place, we can create another page within that create route segment. And this is where we'll have our drawer to be able to create our brand. On my route segment, I have a Medusa UI drawer, and I've also created a state to be able to control the opening and closing of this drawer. By default, this is going to be true, since when we are navigating to this route segment, I want that drawer to be always open. This is what it looks like in our dashboard. Once I navigate to that create route segment, it automatically opens up that drawer. Also going to add a use effect hook that looks at the open state, and whenever the open state is false, it's going to navigate to the previous page. So in our dashboard, this is what it looks like. When I click on that create, it opens up that route segment. And whenever I close this drawer, it takes me back to my main brands page. We're finally ready to create a form for brand creation. We're going to be using a library called React Hook Form. This is already installed within the default Medusa project, and it's a library that's going to help us validate our form values. So instead of creating a different use state for every different input, we're simply going to use this library to help us out. To get started, we're going to use this use form hook from React Hook Form. And this initializes our form and gives us a bunch of helper functions, which we can use to be able to validate, submit, track errors within our forms. Also passing in a type called create brand form values. And besides that, we're setting some default values to empty strings for the name and handle. And now we're actually ready to put together our form. First things first, I'm going to create a form around my drawer.content component. After that, we can create the two inputs for name and handle. So what I'm doing here is I'm importing an input component from Medusa UI, and I'm registering the name field from React Hook Form using the register helper. I'm also setting some parameters as to the rules. So name is a required value, and also the minimum length should be 2 in total. If this is not met, a message will be shown called name is too short. Same thing with the handle. I'm registering the handle field, and I'm setting a required message, as well as if the value is shorter than 2 characters, you'll see a message called handle is too short. At this point, all I really need is a submit button that creates the actual brand, and just a cancel if the user wants to cancel and close the drawer. The last piece here is the onSubmit function. So what this does is it actually submits the form using one of our helpers coming from our use form hook called handle submit. It looks at all the values, and if the values meet our schema, we are ready to actually mutate and create our brand. For the mutation, I already had a hook called use create admin brand, which simply calls my admin brands route to be able to create that new brand. Now I'm ready to create the list table to display all of my different brands. And to do this, we're going to use a component called data table from Medusa UI. And it's going to give us a similar interface to the products table where we can filter out different things, search, paginate, sort, etc. First things first, I actually need to fetch the data that I want to display. And to do this, I'm going to use my query called use admin brands. This simply calls a get request to my admin brands path, which returns all of the different brands. To create our columns, we're going to use a use memo hook with a create data table column helper function, which we can use to be able to define the configurations for our columns. Within that use memo hook, we're going to return all of the different columns that we want to display. In this case, we're only going to display the name and the handle. We're also going to use this use data table hook from Medusa UI. This essentially takes in all of the raw data and the column configurations and gives you a full table which we can display. After that, all we really need to add is the actual data table component. And this just takes in an instance of the table that we created using the use data table hook, and we're all good to go. And on our admin dashboard, now we can see all of the different brands. So if I was to create a new brand, we'll call this Medusa. There you have it. We have our brands table all set up. Now, keep in mind, this is a really minimal example of a data table setup. There's a lot more things you can do, such as search, filters, sorting. But for the time being, we'll just use this minimal example for the sake of this tutorial. If you want to learn more about all the different functionalities of the data table component, feel free to check out the Medusa docs for the data table, and there's just a lot of different things you can do. Now, the final piece that we need is a widget that we can use to be able to link product to brands. I already have a basic widget set up, and within this React component, we're going to use the data.id value, which gives us the product ID of the current product page that we're viewing. I'm going to use that ID to determine if this product is already linked to a brand. And to do this, I'm going to use a use product brand hook, which takes in the product ID. And this is just a simple query of the products, which retrieves the product, but also adds in a field called brand so we can determine if that product is linked to a brand or not. After that, we're going to add a couple if statements to determine if the data is still loading, or if an error exists, we're going to show this error message. In our return statement, we're simply going to display what brand that product is linked to, and if not, we're just going to show no brands linked. Now we can create a form to link product to brands. And for that, I've created a custom React component called product brand link. This simply renders a drawer component, and I'm fetching for all of the different brands that I currently have and simply displaying them within the drawer.body so the user can easily pick and choose which brand that they want to link that product to. I'm also going to import a couple of mutation hooks to link a brand to products or to unlink a brand from products. And these are just tag mutations which call my API route to be able to do that. And then the final piece here is this on link handler. This is called anytime a user tries to link a brand to a product. This takes in the brand ID and it looks at the existing brand ID. And if that exists, we can unlink that brand from that product. And then finally, we can create that new link from a brand to a product. Now I can add that new product brand link component to my main widget file. And we're also going to add in the existing brand ID from my widget. We're all set to go. So I can link any of my products to a brand. I can simply go ahead and click link, and it's all linked and ready to go. And there you have it. That was the basics on extending the Medusa UI dashboard. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next one.